What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today on the channel I am super fortunate to have been loaned for review a Tudor Black Bay 36. A viewer of the channel and fellow member of the Horology 101 Facebook group saw one of my videos that I did about a week ago in which I had mentioned a series of watches that I was considering for my next purchase. Amongst that short list was the Tudor Black Bay 36. He had offered to send his watch over to me on loan for a review and just to get to know the watch a little bit better so I could, make a more informed decision on what I'd like to buy. So, an absolutely huge thank you to him for loaning me this watch. I've had it for about a week now, and so far, I'm really impressed. Now, I also want to mention Horology 101, the Facebook group that I'm a member of and I'm very active in. If you guys aren't already members of the Horology 101 Facebook group, I'll put a link down in the description of this video. I encourage you to go over there and check that group out. We have a great collection of watch enthusiasts over there. It's a small but growing group, but I really do encourage everyone to come over and join me on that Facebook group. As I had mentioned, the Tudor Black Bay 36 was a watch that is on my short list for potential purchase in the not too distant future. There's the Tudor Black Bay 36 and the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36, two very similar watches that I am seriously considering. They're contending with the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moon Watch, a completely different watch, but they're all watches that I'm very interested in. So I'm extremely happy to be able to check this watch out. What I can tell you is that having the watch for the last week or so has not made my decision any easier. There are a few things about this watch that I don't prefer. I don't even want to say don't like. It's that I have small gripes, and I'll share them with you when we go to the tabletop. But by and large, this is a really excellent watch, and I'm very impressed with it. We're going to jump over here to the tabletop. I'll show you the watch, give you the specifications and the features, share my opinions on the watch with you guys. Then, of course, like always, we'll come back over here for some of my final thoughts. Alright guys, here we have it, the Tudor Black Bay 36, reference number M79500-0007. What a great little watch. Very, very happy to have had the opportunity to check this out with you guys. I am enjoying it quite a bit. I think that the first things that we'll cover here, the basic specifications. $2,850 MSRP is the price point for this watch. I don't think that that's incredibly high priced. I think that some people might complain that this features an ETA movement, and once we start approaching that $3,000 price point, I know a lot of you guys want to see an in-house movement. We'll talk more about that in a little bit though. Basic specs about this watch. We have a case diameter of 36 millimeters from side to side, not including the crown. We have a lug width of 19 millimeters. A thickness of only 10.5 millimeters, comes in at a very nice thin size for a Black Bay watch, with lug-to-lugs from one extremity of the case to the other, or what I like to call the watch's wingspan, of approximately 44 millimeters. Overall, definitely a little bit smaller in scale than some people prefer. This is really the exact sort of watch that I'm looking for. And in terms of size and scale, it's almost perfect for me. I'll talk about that more here in a minute though. The other basic features and specs, of course we have a stainless steel case and bracelet. We do obviously have a sapphire crystal, but as you'll probably notice, there's no AR coating here, and I have found that there is a lot of glare on this crystal depending on your surroundings and the lighting conditions. To get a good video, I had to put a black card up above the watch so that when we point the watch up towards my ceiling, it's not reflecting white. Yeah, that's a downside about this watch. We also have a water resist of 150 meters and, of course, a screw-down crown, which helps secure that water resist rating. We have a black gloss dial with applied markers, the historic and iconic snowflake hands, and a generous application of what I assume is Superluminova, the green coloration on all of the markers and the handset. As I had mentioned, this is an ETA 2824. I believe it's a top grade movement. They don't advertise it as such on the Tudor website, but in doing a little bit of research about this watch, my understanding is that this is a top grade ETA movement. The top grade, very much like the chronometer grade, is For all intents and purposes, I guess really the same as the chronometer grade. It just wasn't sent in for chronometer certification. We do get excellent accuracy out of this watch. More on that in a moment. Basic specs on the ETA 2824. It's 38-hour power reserve, runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour. It is, of course, an automatic movement that features hand winding and hacking. Now, to go on to that initial thought that I had earlier, people are going to complain, I think, that at almost $3,000 MSRP, this is using what we would consider a standard ETA movement. It's not standard. It's, again, I believe a top grade, a very good ETA movement. But an ETA nonetheless, not an in-house movement. Not a problem for me, though, for a number of reasons. First of all, very easy and affordable to service when needed. They're just ubiquitous in the watch industry. Everybody knows how to use them, or how to fix them, I guess, is what I mean to say. I guess, in-house is kind of cool. It's the catchphrase that everyone's throwing around. If it's not in-house, it's not any good. That's the sentiment that we hear a lot these days. I'm just not sure if I'm totally bought into that. I want a reliable and an accurate watch. And when we talk about accuracy, I threw this on my time grapher. I'll bring in some video here to show you what kind of time this was keeping. Now I'm just going to show you the dial-up position on my time grapher, but you can see here, very accurate, very good amplitude readings, next to no beat error whatsoever, a very smooth trace line. That's what I want out of a watch. I don't care if the movement says ETA on it. I don't care if the movement says Tudor or Rolex or anything else. I want a watch that is reliable and accurate. That's absolutely what we've got right here. So, again, not a real big problem for me that it's not an in-house movement. If it became an option in the future, and I suspect it probably will, being as Tudor has been doing some in-house movements in recent years, would I be unhappy about that? No, of course not. As long as it's accurate, as long as it's reliable, then that would be fine too. Bringing the camera in a little bit closer here, let's take a look at this stainless steel case, 316L stainless steel. The overall fit and finish on it is very, very nice. I'll kind of bring it up here in profile. You can see there's a great bevel or chamfered edge going along the lugs. The entire side of the case, which is just covered in fingerprints, is all of high polish and it looks great. The case polishing, the finishing of that side flank, yeah, it's really well done. And the tops of the lugs, or the hoods of the lugs, try and come in really close here. We can see it's sort of a radial grain. It's not the straight up and down grain that is a little more familiar to me on Rolex watches, but still very, very well done, very fine and very smoothly finished. Of course, the opposing side of the case also has that same great high-polished finish. It looks outstanding. And, of course, we have the Tudor Rose signed crown. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but I'll give you a quick look at the case back. Not a completely sterile or naked case back. We have just a little bit of embellishment or decoration. Genève, Tudor, Swiss, and the little Tudor shields. Overall, otherwise very basic, but nicely done nonetheless. The case back itself is relatively flat, just coming out to a very, very slight arch, but flatter than a lot of watches that I have had experience with. That Tudor signed crown is kind of a point of contention for a lot of people. First of all, the engraving of the crown on the, or the rose on the crown, it's outstanding. It looks very nice. It's well done. The knurling or texturing of the crown is also good, and actually the size of the crown is very nice in that it is very easy to manipulate or operate, to unscrew it, which is exceptionally smooth. Just takes a few seconds, and then it pops out into the first hand winding position. Hand winding this movement, very nice. There is not resistance, not in a bad way, but it's not really loose. There's not a lot of slack there. You can feel that you're hand winding the movement. Of course, pulling the crown out to the first and only position hacks the movement, and you can go ahead and set the time as necessary. To reseat the crown, of course, you just push it in, and then with a little bit of downward pressure, give it a spin till the threads get caught, and screw it on down. It's very good. I mean, just about the same feel in terms of the threading and the action as I'm familiar with on, say, my Submariner, for example. The point of contention for a lot of people is that on the crown, there's this little step off. It's like I think it's an anodized aluminum ring. I don't know how well it'll show on camera there, in between the crown and the body of the case. Now, in pictures, that really does appear as though the crown is standing way, way off the body of the case. And my initial thoughts on it were less than positive. But in person, it's really not a big deal. It's not something that you really notice when you're looking down at it. Yeah, it's there. Yeah, it does stand off the body a little bit, but I don't feel like it's overdone. Now, could it be flush down to the case? Would that be better? I suppose, in my opinion, yes, it would be. But I don't find it really to be a problem. It's not a strong negative for me, like it is for a lot of people, and like it kind of was for me based on pictures. That was my only experience with this watch up until this point. Of course, the bezel is a smooth, high-polished bezel, and you can see the owner here has got a little bit of a scuff mark. That's something you got to be careful of when you have a smooth, polished bezel like this. I had the same issue with my Rolex Explorer. When I first got that, I got a little nick on the bezel, and yeah, it bugged me for a while when that happened. But you do have to pay attention to your bezels if you want to keep your watch looking nice. A lot of people, and I'm sure the person that owns this watch doesn't really care. You know, it adds character, quote unquote. That's the thing people say. I like keeping my watches minty fresh, so little things like that would probably get on my nerves, but it is what it is. You just have to be careful with these things or learn to live with them. Moving on from that smooth polished bezel, we have, of course, that sapphire crystal. I had alluded to the fact that you get a lot of glare on that crystal. If I pan it over towards the lights, or if I bring it towards the camera, you can see my Sony camera lens there, clear as day, I'm guessing. It is a reflective crystal. That is a slight negative. I'm used to reflective crystals. My Submariner's crystal is reflective. My Hamilton watches in general are just known for having highly reflective crystals. So if that's something that gets on your nerves, you're probably going to want to skip this watch. But I don't find it to be a huge problem. It doesn't really impede the legibility. It's more of like an aesthetic thing. It's like when I look down to tell the time, I see my reflection in the glass sometimes. Some people hate it, some people love it. It is what it is. Just thought I would share that basic information, a little bit of my impressions about the crystal there. The dial of this watch, and why this watch is probably described this way. It is like though as if the Rolex Explorer and the Rolex Submariner had a baby. It does very much have that style of dial. I do like it quite a bit. We have, of course, applied markers with the triangle up at the 12, batons at 3, 6, and 9, and then circle markers at all of the rest of the positions on the dial. No date complication, just a time-only three-hander. I think that is absolutely preferable. Having a date over at the 3 o'clock, I think would take something away from the very nice aesthetic of this dial. Now, we do have a semi-train track, seconds track, or minute track on the outboard edge of the dial. Bring it in here nice and close to kind of give you a better look at that. It's not stark bright white. It's kind of a gray or off-white color, so as to not distract from the rest of the dial. I think that was a good color choice. I think that overall, the presentation on this dial is fantastic. Of course, we have the Tudor Geneve and the shield logo up at the 12 o'clock side, rotor, self-winding with that little smiley face style or embellishment on the self-winding verbiage or text. It's just a really great layout. And then, of course, down at the very bottom, we have Swiss made. Now, this dial and the handset are generously filled with what I believe is superluminova. I'll bring in a lume shot for you guys to see it. Yeah, the lume is very strong. It seems to be rather long-lasting in my relatively brief testing. Overall, the lume is done really well. The hands, the markers, everything amply applied, including the seconds hand. Now, speaking of the handset, what we have here is Tudor's kind of iconic snowflake-style handset. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the hands, in particular the hour hand. It's not so bad as to say, like, I would never want to buy this watch, but when I'm filling up my positives and negatives or pros and cons, yeah, the snowflake hour hand just It doesn't really excite me. In particular on this watch, which is kind of smaller in scale, the hour hand feels almost a little bit overwhelming to the rest of the dial. I know most people are not going to agree with me. I know that the snowflake style hands are a fan favorite. If it were me, I would prefer, I don't know, syringe hands maybe, something a little bit more simple. Certainly not Mercedes hands like a Rolex, because this isn't a Rolex, even though it shares some of that Rolex DNA. But something a little different would be my preference. Being as how they made this a part of the Black Bay line, I guess they felt like it had to have the snowflake hands like all the other Black Bays. Again, my preference would be for something a little bit different. The bracelet on this watch, very well done. Of course, we have solid end links, as we can see if we look at the back here. No lightweight, low-quality folded or hollow end links. Very nicely done. They are not end links like you find on a Rolex Oyster bracelet in that they're fully extended. You can see that here on this end link, the very first bracelet link is articulating. So what that will do is it'll make it wear nice and flush down to your wrist, as you can see, like so. Whereas if it were a fully extended link with kind of a protruding horn, it would kind of flare out further and maybe restrict the size of wrists to a degree that it would fit on comfortably. Again, I think that this was because they chose to make this a sort of unisex watch, and they were trying to cast a really wide net and appeal to both men and women and make it wear small, but I don't know. I think they missed the mark here in one regard, and that is the 19 millimeter lug width. And I'm going to pull out my, what do you call it? These guys, my calipers here, and I want to show you if these were 20 millimeters. So here we can see we're measured in at 19 millimeters. Let me bring my calipers out one more millimeter. What we would have is lugs that were that much wider. Now, if they restructured this case to be 1 millimeter wider, basically moved the lugs out just a little bit this way and a little bit that way, had a true 20 millimeter lug width here on the bracelet, I think that it would sit on the wrist in a much more preferable fashion for me. I'm not saying that the 19 millimeter lug width is a deal breaker. I just feel like I would probably prefer it. It would feel a little bit more substantial if they just brought it out ever so slightly. And in doing that, not made the lugs thinner, but brought the lugs out, right? Just half a millimeter, bring the lugs out each way. It would give it a slightly more masculine stance. Again, I think they decided to not do that because they wanted to cast a really wide net and appeal to both men and women. Problem being, now, a year or two later, they've introduced a number of even smaller sizes. So there's plenty of products in the catalog to appeal to women that are looking for something that feels a little more petite on the wrist. Yeah, that's one of my few negatives about this watch. There's really not many bad things to say about it, but in terms of how it feels on the wrist, it does feel even smaller than the 36 millimeter case diameter might suggest because of that 19 millimeter lug width. Now, the rest of the bracelet, including the clasp, very well done, with the exception of the links not being those kind of solid, full-sized oyster-style links. The rest of it is very much like a standard three-piece oyster bracelet. We have a full satin brushed finish with polished sides, as you can see. Of course, it is sized with screws, as you would expect. Very small screws. I want to say those are probably something like 1.4 millimeter screws. I didn't try to resize it, but I was curious, and my 1.6 millimeter screwdriver would not fit in the slot, so I just wanted to know if it was like a standard oyster that you would find on an Explorer or a Submariner. Different size, so you'll have to find the correct size screws if you were to get this watch and need to resize it. The clasp is also very well done. Very, very well done, as a matter of fact. Of course, we have the Tudor logo branded into the fold-over safety latch. Interestingly, they kind of integrated the design of the bracelet to create the shape of the Tudor crown. Very, very cool. You get your thumb under that little latch, you can flip it open. We, of course, have these ceramic balls for the locking mechanism of the folding latch. It's kind of cool. I guess they'll last basically forever. Once you get the latch opened, I would have expected, and I guess it's not a problem, but I would have expected that this portion to be hinged, similar to an oyster clasp, but it's not. It's just friction locked, so there's no articulation or hinging effect on the clasp there. But once you get the clasp opened, it comes open to a very nice, high-polished, machined, solid swing arm with a little bit of Tudor branding there. And then the clasp itself is, again, also very high quality. You do get 3 micro adjusts, no sort of toolless adjustment option here, which is a little bit of a letdown at this almost $3,000 price point. We'd like to see some sort of small gliding lock type system. Unfortunately, no, we don't have that. But overall, the quality is still outstanding. It's a very nice bracelet. It's a very nice clasp. And, you know, I guess with any watch, I could say like, oh, I wish it had this, I wish it had that. But there's really no significant shortcomings here. Overall, very, very well done. For a little bit of a size comparison, here it is next to my Submariner. Of course, the Submariner Super Case 40 millimeters and the Tudor Black Bay 36 millimeters. The Submariner also has a 20 millimeter lug width versus that 19 millimeters on the Black Bay. But I thought it might be useful to get a little bit of a side-by-side comparison so you could see, you know, how small is it? It's really not tiny, right? I mean, next to the Submariner, does it look smaller? Yeah, of course. Does it look diminutive? No, I don't think so. I think that it's a really good size. I'll throw it on my wrist and let you guys see what it looks like on the wrist as well. Alright guys, here we have it, the Tudor Black Bay 36 on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. It is not sized perfectly for me, it's a little bit tight, so if it looks like it's strangling my wrist a little bit, yeah, it's just slightly too tight for me. But overall, size, the scale, it's really well done. It feels comfortable, I think it looks basically spot on. Again, I feel like if it was just a little bit wider at the lugs, it would feel a little bit more masculine, I guess is again the way I might describe it. And I'm not trying to beat that dead horse. I'm not saying that that's a huge problem, but that's one of the few kind of big takeaways for me is that it feels even smaller than I might have expected a 36 millimeter Tudor to feel. The width or the height off the wrist, it's very low profile, again at 10.5 millimeters. Stays down tight to the wrist, just like I would like. The clasp, again, very, very nicely done, centered up perfectly on my wrist. Overall, it's, you know, maybe not a grand slam, but it's pretty much a home run. And my decision between this, which is super high value for the price, versus, say, a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, it's going to be a tough one, you know, save the money and get something that's nearly what I'm looking for, or spend a bunch more money, and maybe still not even be 100% satisfied, because we all know the way that I am. Well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation of this fantastic Tudor Black Bay 36. Stick with me for a few more minutes. I will wrap this up with some of my final thoughts. But yeah, overall, very much enjoyed having this watch. Very, very happy to have had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with it. It's outstanding for sure, without a doubt. Alright guys, well I hope you enjoyed that presentation of the Tudor Black Bay 36, and thanks for sticking around for my final thoughts. What are my closing thoughts, my conclusions about this watch? Well, having had it here in my possession for the last week has not made my purchase decision any easier. As I had mentioned, I'm considering this versus the Oyster Perpetual 36 by Rolex. Very, very tough decision. This watch comes in at a much more aggressively favorable price, $2,850 versus the roughly, off the top of my head, I want to say $5,600 or $5,700 of the Oyster Perpetual. There's a whole heck of a lot of value here when you're comparing it to that, which is a really competitive model. Less than half the price, or about half the price, I guess, maybe not quite less. Still, a ton of value here in this watch. Downsides, potentially, it's an ETA 2824-2 movement. Not really a downside for me. A top grade ETA is a great movement. I threw it on the time grapher and it keeps excellent time, as I would expect it to. Would it be nice to have an in-house movement? I guess, but I don't really get too carried away with the necessity of having an in-house movement. But I could see where people would make that argument. Probably my biggest complaint is the sizing, and while a 36mm watch in diameter is exactly what I'm looking for. I was a little disappointed with the 19 millimeter lug width, and as I showed you on the tabletop, if they would have spread those lugs out that 1 extra millimeter and restructured the placement of the lugs, I think it would have sat on the wrist with a much more masculine feel. Not to say that this feels like a woman's watch, it's not that small, but I think that's what they were going for. I think they were trying to keep it unisex and have a wider appeal to both men and women. Unfortunately, that's irrelevant now because they've created a number of other models, both in dial color differences and in size differences. I want to say they have a 31 millimeter in their catalog as of this year. Maybe it's not 31 off the top of my head, I don't remember. But they did introduce smaller sizes, which puts this one more in the realm of a man's watch in my mind, at least a small-wristed man. And, you know, my wrist isn't tiny, 6 3/4 inches is kind of average. I just favor that smaller size. But that's my guess. When they designed this watch, they probably weren't thinking into the future of making smaller models in their, adding smaller models to their catalog, so they probably wanted to try to cast as wide of a net as possible, and I think that's probably why they went with that 19 millimeter lug width. Again, I would just prefer it if it was chunked up just a hair, 1 millimeter, that's all I'm asking for. I think it would have sat on the wrist a little bit better. Besides that, besides the ETA movement, which isn't a complaint for me, besides the little discrepancy with the spacing of the lugs, there's really nothing else I dislike about this watch. I think it's an absolute bargain, again, especially when we compare it to competitive options that are almost double the price vis-a-vis the Rolex Oyster Perpetual 36. Yeah, it's making my decision, my future plans of purchase, very, very difficult. Well, I'm going to wrap this up and say thanks for tuning in. Big thank you to the person that loaned me this watch, a viewer and fellow member of the Horology 101 Facebook group. Again, I encourage you all to click that link down in the description and join the Horology 101 Facebook group. Join me over there in the watch discussions. I guess that's going to do it for today. Thanks for tuning in, and if you want to help support the channel, as always, there's a bunch of simple ways that you can do that. Follow me on my social medias, be it Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, links down below. Contribute on Patreon. Big thanks to the guys that are over on Patreon supporting me right now. As always, if you like something that I've reviewed and you want to purchase it, I will have links to Amazon through my affiliate account found down below in the description. If you click that link before you buy something I've reviewed, or anything else for that matter, I get a small commission. Those commissions do add up. Big thanks to everyone that has been using those Amazon affiliate links. I really do appreciate it. Also, I don't think I need to tell you guys this, but subscribe, click the like button, click the notification button, do all that YouTube stuff that you're supposed to do. You're all already aware of that. I rarely mention it, but I figure why not bring it up here. Well, that's going to do it for today. I'll have another review later this week, so for now, I will say bye now.